You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Happy Wednesday. This is the podcast that shares and inspires unconventional career journeys through fascinating interviews. And if you are a big fan of the podcast, please help it grow by rating it on iTunes and whatever podcast listening device you use. Any review, any rating helps gain the trust of others to take a little chance and explore and listen on other interviews. Also, you can help the podcast grow by telling your close friends who might be struggling in their career journeys or are somewhat in the phase of exploring. They're looking for an adventure. Then this might be the podcast for them. You'll be a great friend to them as well as a great friend to me. So those are some ways. And you can also subscribe to the OMD Ventures newsletter where I share all the happenings, pros, cons. Usually I try to only share the wins because I want to remain an optimist in your life. But all that fun stuff is provided to the weekly newsletter subscribers. So subscribe to the newsletter at omdventures.com and there's all kinds of links that I'll take you there. Okay, so today's conversation is with Jaxson Khan. Jaxson is the CEO of Khan & Associates, a consulting firm that focuses on artificial intelligence, AI for short, and FinTech. As a result, he is also a co-host of an AI podcast called Ask AI. And I reached out to Jaxson after learning he had left his role as the head of marketing at Nudge.ai, which is a startup in Toronto, to live remotely in Colombia, where he was getting paid to write in-depth articles for companies. It was something that I didn't know was possible. And so when I read about it, I just immediately have to have him on the show. And so needless to say, I wasn't disappointed when we met up to have the interview, as I learned about how Jaxson had decided to not take a prestigious consulting offer early in his career, but he chose to take the startup path early. And we also talk about why he left that to start his own consulting firm and discuss the early years of running his own service-based company, what it's been like, the lessons he's learned, what he would do if he had to do it all over again, and how he builds and strengthens relationships as he continuously evolves in his career. As someone who's been meeting a lot of fascinating people, the topic of building stronger relationships has been constantly on my mind, and so this was a really helpful conversation for me personally. And it's also been fun to learn about starting a service-based business as a solopreneur, really, because a lot of companies that come up on the media and also the many cool entrepreneurs I've interviewed on Accounted For have been venture-backed entrepreneurs themselves. And so it's always fascinating to see this side of the lens. And I really found this conversation with Jaxson to be fascinating, and I think you'll find as much value out of it as I did as well. So without further ado, please tune into our conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today on the podcast, we have Jaxson Khan. Hey Jaxson, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Jaxson here is the CEO of Khan & Associates. And so Jaxson, the first question I'd like to ask you is, I looked at your background. You're a man of many fascinating careers. So something I've been struggling with as I've been going around working in different co-working spaces is really introducing yourself in sometimes even, requiredly a concise way when you have so much you've done. So how do you introduce yourself when you first meet someone?
That's a funny question, Daniel. So for me right now, I do a couple different things. One thing I'll say is I effectively run now a consulting firm. It's called Khan & Associates, effectively myself and my business partners. And what we do is we help mostly technology companies, particularly in the verticals of artificial intelligence and finance. And we help them communicate better so that they can grow faster, so that they can bring incredible solutions to market. The other thing I do is I spend a lot of time actually working with nonprofit organizations, especially ones that are abroad. So what I'm enabling, my goal with our firm is we're actually enabling people who are interested in working with nonprofits to do so by paying them well, by paying them to do great work so that they can spend their other time to directly offer service. So an example of that is I was working down in Colombia, actually partnered with an organization that is a strategic partner of the government of Canada to deliver services down to rural and remote communities there. And I was able to spend actually 15, 20 hours a week doing that on top of running the business. And so that's something I care about a lot. I mean, I'd say if I have twin interests, it's technology and international development. So I'm trying to do the best I can to bridge those two.
International development. Does that mean that you've had a childhood of like traveling around the world, or?
Not at all, actually. My parents, we grew up in Mississauga, my brothers and I, and our parents, never actually really took us much to travel until maybe the end of high school for me. And I didn't even leave North America until I was in university, actually.
Oh, okay.
Wow. So not a lot of traveling actually until I started to get into university, and then I think I went to England my first year, and then I spent some time volunteering in East Africa. And post that, it really captured my interest. It's something that the world needs is to have people to effectively do knowledge exchange. I think, there's a lot of criticisms of development in general, but I think what's most important is that we share what's working wherever that is in the world so we can help other people to do the same. Mm-hmm. I'm really passionate about that kind of knowledge exchange.
Yeah, and so I think from my understanding, you studied global development at the University of Western Ontario.
Yes.
I'm curious, what drew you to the global development side? When the reason I ask is so my child, I traveled a lot when I was young, and for me, traveling was always a big part, and so I was always fascinated about the world development, and Toronto is the sixth city I've lived in thus far, and so that's always been a big part. But I'm curious, for you growing up, as you said, you didn't get to leave North America until later on. What fascinated you to go into global development?
I think I'd always wanted to see the world because I hadn't really had the chance when I was young. The other piece for me is I did know what I had, which is that I was very, very lucky. I grew up, in a middle class, stable family. Had both my parents, had an amazing family, great brothers. I went to a good school, and I've always really, really been proud of Canada. I've always wanted to represent Canada. I think that the world needs more Canada. That's one of my favorite sayings. I just think our country has so much to offer, and at a time, honestly, we can see now, when the world is experiencing so much strife, a lot of unsettled people. There's protests everywhere. I mean, Canada is one of the few countries that actually has a certain level of stability. And I think one of the most interesting statements of late is that, the American dream, as it's so often described, actually lives in Canada. And so what I really feel passionate about is not taking my upbringing for granted, and wherever I go, trying to help bring a little bit more of Canada to wherever it is I am, and also to learn from other people. I mean, there's so much I don't know, and the more I travel, the more I speak to folks from different countries, the more I realize how much there is to learn and to grow together.
Mm-hmm. And when I look at your professional kind of resume that's on LinkedIn, you had a lot of different experiences in many startups. You were in business development and product management, first at Paddle, which worked in nonlinear career technology. Then you were doing marketing at Influitive. You also did public relations there. You were then the head of marketing at Nudge.ai until you left and started your own consulting company with your partners, and you also host a artificial intelligence podcast. But something that stuck out with me when you were probably in university is that you were, the 20 under 20 in Canada, and it seemed like you're very involved in a lot of education, politics, and technology, some kind of intersection there where you helped create an advisory council at the Globe and Mail, and you were at I think it's called AstraZeneca. You started some education and corporate social responsibility advisory council there. Given that kind of, I think, focus on what I could see as being a mix of politics, geopolitical stuff in the early years, what made you go into the startup world?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was in university and school, I thought a lot about the kind of change I could make, and for me, I saw that we're now living in a world where young people make up over 50% of the world's population. We're facing some crises, such as being one of the most indebted generations. We're facing the climate crisis. I think there's a lot of issues that young people can actually very markedly speak on. I had maybe some impact on a couple different organizations and the government and whatnot, but now we look at young people really taking charge, for example, Greta Thunberg. And I think that young people's voices are now really, really taking hold and are being seen as absolutely essential to global discourse and have unique perspectives on global issues. So that's something I've always cared about. But the other thing I've always cared about is how do we empower people to effectively use their voices, to develop their careers, to take charge of whatever it is they're doing. I think it's easy to use your voice when you grow up in privilege, for example, like myself. I think it's harder when you don't necessarily do that. And so what I've always been fascinated by is technology. We live in an age where whether it's a mobile device or, hundreds of thousands of people coming onto the internet newly, every day. I mean, that is empowering a lot of people, especially a lot of young people. So I've always held the interest, certainly in the political side, but also in the technological side, to enable more people to have voices, to build companies, to build organizations, whatever it is. And so when I was coming out of university, I had a choice. I had, a lot of my friends in business, for example, going into management consulting, going into finance. And, I almost kind of went down that path too. I even interviewed with the firms and got an offer, and signed it actually. And then at the last minute, I just realized it wasn't for me. I realized, that I was in the middle of a huge amount of change. And what I saw was that the primary vessel I could see doing that at the time. And again, this is, I guess, a decade, the last decade or so that I really thought about it. It's like technology. A lot of startups, I think, have been the ones driving innovation. So I wanted to be a part of that, whatever form that took. For me, at first, that was like a career technology startup, which I helped start with a few friends. And then I moved into more like, I guess what I saw is the tools that enabled people to create movements. So I moved into what was called like an advocate mobilization platform, helped everything from like companies to organizations to mobilize people around a cause, to mobilize people around a brand. I thought that was really interesting. And then I also thought a lot about relationships, right? How can technology help build relationships? We've seen the fallout of social networks in terms of disinformation campaigns and things like that. Most recently, my last full-time role was at Nudge, which actually helps measure the relationship strength between people. And I've always been interested in how can different groups build and maintain relationships over time, wherever they're coming from, whatever sector they're from. So that's something I care about a lot. And, I guess if you can follow that intellectual thread, like I've always have been interested in the relationships between different groups of people, how people can become more powerful wherever they are in their communities. For me, I want to both create the tools as well as the movements to help bring people to be stronger in whatever they've decided to pursue.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this was kind of by design, where one of the first startups you worked at was a career technology company that focuses on non-linear careers. But what kind of system did you implement to kind of navigate your way through these different roles until eventually you got to the point of starting your own consulting company?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly easier to connect the dots looking backwards. I mean, at the time, I will honestly admit, sometimes I had no idea. When I started off at Paddle, we were making some really cool products that, for example, I spent basically 6 months like taking like every personality test there is to take out there. That was one of my product development jobs. And then, that test is actually still online, which is kind of cool. And there's one on motivations, which actually the outcome for me was that I realized that I'm someone who wants to make change. And that's just like a core part of my being. And I learned from another test I took that I'm also very adaptable. And so for me, like the nonlinearity has always just seemed like a state of being. Like I truly believe that people can bridge experiences from different disciplines, different functions, different sectors, whether that's like public or private, or governments or nonprofits. And the more that you can blend those experiences and pull different pieces into new experiences, into new jobs, into new occupations, I think the more you actually have the chance to innovate, because you're just bringing different knowledge. And we actually see, even in scientific fields, for example, or research fields, like if you work at the intersections, you can often have more interesting discoveries. So I really believe in that as I guess as a philosophy of career development. But more tactically, like what I did when I was at those different points was I thought, these are pivot points for me. Each kind of, almost like people talk about pivoting a startup, the business model, the product market fit. Like for me, it's like, well, what is my next pivot point? Like, how do I get closer? How do I focus on the experiment of me, iterate to the next version? How do I, become Jaxson 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, whatever that is? And it might be totally different. It might be like a different specialization or set of specializations. It might just be a different way of branding myself. Like there's different ways to, in a sense, change your career. It doesn't always mean you need to take a new job. So that's something I really promote is, how do you have an iterative experimental form of career development? How do you experiment across different sectors? And that's how you become more nonlinear, not just signing up to be, a tier kind of early tier account representative at this company and slowly making your way up for 30 years. Like that just doesn't and won't happen for our generation. So we need to learn to be more adaptable, to take chances, to take lateral moves and not just vertical moves up the career ladder.
Mm-hmm. And as you transitioned over, for me, so my career journey is like I started out in accounting, iterated into consulting, did a whole bunch of stuff there, and then became an investor. And after that, just started a media platform. And I found, although each iteration was challenging with its own obstacles and stuff, the challenge of starting your own thing I found to be a very difficult process. I'm just curious, how did you navigate your way through to kind of starting your own consulting company?
Oh man, honestly, like again, there's no clear path. Like I actually wrote a Facebook post recently, which was, so in 2018, I had a really hard, difficult year in my life. The partner I had at the time, we separated, moved out of the apartment that we had. My parents got divorced. My two grandparents passed away. This was all in like a period of a few months. So it was a lot, right? So I basically went through a big, emotionally difficult time in my life. And also just logistically, like moving your whole life around is hard. And all your possessions and all your things, and attending different services and whatnot. It was a hard period of my life, and what I started to think about was, I have spent now several years working in technology. I feel confident about what I've done. I feel like I've made good relationships, had good mentors. What would it look like if I made a lateral move? What would it look like? These were the questions I was asking myself. What would it look like if I changed things up? Again, I've always wanted to live and spend time internationally, and so what I decided to do was, over a period of months, to transition out of a job I loved. Told the team and worked towards that goal. And I decided that I was going to go live down in Latin America. I'd never been there before. I'd always wanted to go there. I've always wanted to learn a new language too. And given some background in French, Spanish was a natural choice. And I've always been interested to kind of go, I guess, south. It's on the same time zone in a lot of respects, where I wanted to go and be down in Colombia. But it was different. It was very, very different. But to make that happen, what did I have to do? Well, I had to start my own company so that I could start working remotely, so that I could start working for clients down there. I knew I didn't want to have all my time occupied by work because I wanted to leave some time open to volunteer with organizations down there to take Spanish lessons. So I started my own firm. And when I left last year, I actually left pretty much around this time last year, I had one client who I was doing just a bit of work for. I didn't really know what I was going to do, what I was going to specialize in. Thought it was marketing consulting, ended up becoming a lot of freelance writing. And now, the business, a year later, I guess the business has done quite well. I was able to do a lot of what I wanted. I learned not half bad Spanish. I worked for international development organizations. I traveled a lot. So, in a lot of respects, it was a successful year. But the truth is, when I thought about it, like all I knew was like, I just need to change my situation. But I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I just kind of made what I would call iterative improvements. It was like, okay, I have one client. How do I at least get two? How do I get three? Spanish. Well, could I do 2 weeks of lessons and just see how that goes? And then that became a few months. And with international development, like it started with me just volunteering with an organization. And eventually it turned into, okay, well, what if you come in and contract for us for a bit and do some work for us? And it became a deeper engagement. And like all of those were just small steps along a path. I didn't exactly know where it was going to go.
I'm actually fascinated by you mentioned how the previous job when you were at Nudge, it was a job that you actually enjoyed, you liked, that you decided to leave. And for me, investing was supposed to be the dream job. Like I'd always been a huge fan of Buffett and Charlie Munger, and that's what I wanted to be. And I still tell people, like, I still love investing. I still do it. But I left because I wanted something more from it. But I found that to be very hard for a lot of my friends to kind of understand. Really, like, don't you just only leave jobs that you dislike? Everyone assumes that you dislike each previous thing that you left. And I'm wondering for you, what was that conversation like internally, as well as like when you try to like think about it from the journey of, the act of leaving something that you like?
Yeah, I think especially in North America, we have this fallacy around comfort. So like happiness being comfort. So you imagine, okay, I've got a house, I've got a partner, I've got kids, I've paid off my mortgage, I've got a good job. Like that's happiness. And I mean, I think a lot of those things could contribute to happiness, certainly. But necessarily fulfillment, I'm not sure. Right. And I think one of the realizations I've had, and, I have very dear family and friends, but sometimes your friends and family may not necessarily want, in some ways, what you might consider best for you. They might just want what's good for you, right? They want you to be safe. They want you to be comfortable. They want you to be happy. But then you taking a chance, you going to, a more dangerous country, you taking an uncertain path, you starting a business, doing a new job. Like these are all more uncertain things, which may not necessarily lead you to happiness. In fact, they could lead you to a lot of sadness or pain. And so they won't necessarily advise you to do those things. In fact, they might be crazy too sometimes. But that being said, I mean, there is something to be said for building trust in yourself, for taking those kinds of uncertain decisions, for, holding the people close who will support you no matter what. And sometimes you're not going to convince everybody that it's the right move, but you don't have to, right? I mean, it's important. What's ultimately important is that you have the confidence to know that if you take a step, an uncertain step, that the worst case is, especially if you're from a country like Canada, even if you hit rock bottom, you have back here free healthcare, free education, a lot of free services, a lot of help and support. I mean, we have the opportunity in so many ways. And so I would say to someone, if you're doubting yourself or on the fence to start a business or to do something new or to take a chance, like, just do it. Mm-hmm. The worst case is you have a lot to fall back on. And for me, like, I know my mom wasn't first jazzed when I told her I wanted to move down to Colombia. But, through a lot of time and conversations, realized that it was the right thing for me to do, because I felt in my core that it was a change I needed to make. And so, something's not always going to make sense. It's not always necessarily going to make sense to leave a good job, to leave a home that you have, but it may feel like the right thing to do. And you should validate that. You should question your assumptions. You should wonder if it's a want or if it's a need for you. For me, it ended up being a need. For me, following through with that ended up being the best decision that I've ever made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said you started out with one client. How did you first get that one client?
Honestly, man, completely random. I had a guy who had a random conversation with like 2 years prior reach out to me out of the blue 3 months before I left the country and said, "Hey, I'm working on this new business." And it was a writing business for a certain type of client. And I said, "Okay, that's interesting." And I said, "I'm actually about to go and move away so I could take on some extra work." So I got really lucky to have a first client. But your first client doesn't necessarily last forever. We did a lot of good work together, thousands of dollars of great work together. A lot of clients worked on together. But the tone of the business changed. And, him and I still talk a lot, but I think what I realized is I wanted to go deeper on projects that I was truly interested in. For example, like I worked in AI in my past role and in sort of the AI field. I wanted to go deeper on those types of clients. I've also always been really interested in fintech. So those are the kind of two verticals I've decided to particularly specialize in. Our company still does serve some other clients, but I've always wanted to learn more about those areas. They're some of the most transformative areas that I see in tech. So then once I made that niche almost in my mind, I started going after clients who fit that kind of profile. And I love working with startups, but I also decided for my earlier clients, one of the focuses for me was just having clients that I knew weren't necessarily going to run out of money, weren't going to change dramatically from time to time. So I did aim for a bit bigger companies, usually companies with like maybe 200, 300 employees. That can at least ensure like I've got some stability. And now that I have a few of those clients, I'm able to continue doing one of the things I love, which is to work with smaller companies and startups to help them, get ahead as well.
Mm. Yeah. How did you actually come down? So as I've been building up my own platform and as I'm doing projects on starting my own services, there's a lot of literature on you should niche down. And there's a lot of things where I found, as I've been doing this for the last year and a half, where I understand it conceptually, but it's taken me time to actually understand it after making many mistakes. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I'm wondering what kind of maybe there's specific situations or insights that kind of led you down to okay, I'm gonna go deeper into AI and I'm gonna get the bigger clients.
Yeah, I think one of the insights was I remember I had a situation where 2 or 3 of my clients all at once, so one of the people I was working with left one company, another company was an early stage startup and basically ran out of money, and then another company hired a full-time person. Right. So basically had 3 different clients, these 3 different situations, which just meant work was either on hold or just there wasn't really a future for it at those respective companies. And that all happened really fast. And what I thought about was, well, I don't want to get stuck in this situation again because I basically didn't make money for a month. So, and I had to rely on some savings ahead. So what I did instead was I thought about, well, which clients do I not predict this happening to? And for me, it was very fast growing, better funded AI and fintech companies where it seemed like even if they had a full-time writer, there was so much going on, there's so much changing that they always had some extra capacity that they needed to continue to want to work on new projects. The second piece was having money around it wasn't necessarily a problem. And the third was, even if they have a full-time team, they may want some more specialized knowledge. And I have some good experience writing for AI, and there's not, I think, a lot of experienced AI and fintech writers, for example, out there because they're just newer fields. So I decided to double down on that. And so far it's been really, really good for the business. So I think sometimes it was I had one AI client, but it's I looked at that and I was well, maybe I should just double down on what's working. Right. And so I did. And so far it's working out really well. Yeah.
On the writing side, I'm very curious, like how did that writing come up? I asked because it's also, once again, as I said earlier, as a caveat, this is very selfish, but my platform, I've been writing an essay mainly on like the theme of self-mastery, human performance for the last, I think I have like 85, 88 articles that are like 1,000,
Wow.
2,000 words. And I've learned about like Medium started like curating, and I'm slowly getting paid. And it's inseminated the idea of, could I actually get paid to write stuff? Even if I don't write a book? And I know you've written like more than like 100,000 words or something, writing for so many different clients. You have all these super long machine learning topics on Springboard. You've also written like an ebook. Like, how did it all like get started for you?
Honestly, man, it started by writing. It sounds so stupid, but it's like I started writing a few articles here and there, and then suddenly those snowballed, right? Like that turned into, okay, well, what if we write a longer ebook? Okay, what if we write a 25,000 word ebook, or what if we start doing big series? Or I was talking to a client today about, doing 30 articles in a row. It's kind of like, it all kind of picks up. I think once, like, if you make a good name for yourself, people like what you write. I think the other piece was socializing the writing. So I typically try and post and share my best pieces. And I found I was getting a lot of good feedback. So I'd share things on LinkedIn, for example, and get, tens of thousands of views on a single article. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is hitting a chord with people. And I don't think I write just to get, likes and audience, feedback. But for me, it was okay. It was at least some validation that this is really interesting content. And that's when I decided to double down on what I would call, very human language for machine topics, right? It's people still want to read in a way that's enjoyable. They don't just want to read all this technical jargon. I think that's sometimes where highly technological companies can struggle, right? Maybe they've got engineers writing blogs, or they're so excited to talk about these amazing products they're creating, but people don't love salesy content. They don't love when they feel like they're being sold to, being marketed to. What they rather feel like is, to have a conversation or to feel like a friend is talking to them. And so the balance you want to hit is informative but friendly, smart, but accessible. So striking that balance takes some practice. But really, when you talk about, I calculate I end up writing over 100,000 words for either myself or different clients this year. That just took like writing either every day, every week. I usually write every day. I also read every day. For me, that's really important. You've got to keep that literacy up, that fluency, that just ease with language, and with different voices. That makes it all a lot easier.
And how would one get started in terms of if you actually wanted to try to build a part of your career as a writer? How did you get started with that?
So I think where I got started was, even back in university, I started even emailing newspapers sometimes. And I remember you have to be very persistent, but I remember one time I wanted to write for the Globe and Mail. This was a goal I had when I was like 18 or 19. And I emailed and called an editor like 11 times in total within the span of like 3 days. And I was incredibly persistent. I'm not necessarily saying this strategy is going to work again, but I basically just said, this is a super important topic right now, and it will be for the next 3 days. I think it's critical that we print this article, and here's my outline for it. And eventually, she was kind of like, who is this kid? And she eventually got back to me and said, okay, give me 500 words by tomorrow. And I stayed up all night and wrote the whole thing and edited it 50 times. And then I started writing, I got that published. I wrote a few more for them, started writing for other publications. I got more involved in with my nonprofit at the time I was working with. And then, post school, post that, I was, when I started working as a marketer, that's also when I started writing more. I think, writing more as a marketer is you start writing a lot more business type language, which helps you produce content fast. So that was where I really got started. But I'd say where I got almost into the daily practice of it has only really been this past year or so. Because for me, it took writing every day or every week, choosing intentionally like very impactful topics, interesting topics. And also, honestly, like not just writing to market a product or service, but to write to just engage people's minds. I think when you like the writing that you're putting out, I think it's a lot easier to write. It can be easier to be more biased. So that's why I think I typically prefer to write articles that have a strong research basis, like lots of links and and lots of things to follow up on. So that's my perspective. I don't know if that's a perfect perspective, but it is like eventually you kind of just got to start writing, whatever capacity that's in, and you can slowly improve over time. I think one thing is that everybody thinks they can write. They really do. And I will say that I've got a long ways to go to become, the kind of writer I ultimately want to be. But I think that a lot of practices may be better. And I think for a lot of people, they undervalue it. So what I do now is the clients I work with, I only work with clients who value writing. I actually decided to increase my prices for this year, not just to make money, but honestly, because it kind of does separate the people who are willing to pay for very high quality work versus just churning stuff out like a machine. And I would rather work on more targeted projects and honestly have less work that's higher paying, that's high quality. I think that that's a better way to go. And honestly, for companies, like even if you're just trying to build links for like, let's say SEO, like that's a better way to go as well. Like that's how Google cares about content, is if people find value, if it's worth reading. So whether you're trying to get leads for your business or you're just trying to actually enjoy what you're writing and convert more people, like it pays to invest in quality.
And in terms of starting and slowly trying to build momentum for the consulting business, I found that there's always this kind of the chicken or the egg problem where some clients are like, well, have you done this with 100 other people? And you go, no, but I've written on all this stuff that seems to get the attention, and I've done all these other things that can translate to it. And then many times it's really hard to close that, and it sometimes leads to like an internal like imposter syndrome question of, can I actually do this? It doesn't seem like the market is responding, and then you constantly try to pivot to like different markets. But I'd be curious for you, like how did you navigate through all that?
Insane persistence. Like I don't know how to say it other than that, but like I have sometimes sent dozens of emails to a single person over this past year to get their business over time. There's one head of marketing who is at a very well-known AI company, and I'm looking forward to meeting her. But it's been tricky to get a meeting with her, and I do respect her for managing her time that well. But I definitely pursued. I've been very persistent. Like every time I've been back in Toronto, anytime that we've had a chance to find a meeting, I'm on her LinkedIn posts. I make sure to comment. I make sure to read them. I think it just takes time and persistence. I'm very hopeful. I think we'd be a great fit to work together. With other clients too, sometimes it's been like making time to go to a different city, making it convenient to go and meet with that client, making time for them. Sometimes that's meant sacrifices personally with friends or family just to make clients work. But the thing is, I think once you get a client, once you do some good work for them, and once you quote unquote made it with them, things become easier. You establish that basis of trust. So I'd say go as hard as you can until you get that first deal. Do a really, really great job at it, and hopefully things ease up after that. You can, not that you can go and relax and forget on quality, but just, maybe you won't be so tense and you can just really just put out your best work. You have a trusted relationship with the client. That makes everything easier. But to get the first client, you've got to work for it. You've got to hustle. You got to show yourself, show them that it's worth it. And when I say hustle, I don't mean like spam them, to be clear. Like I'm very persistent, but when I talk about 30 emails over a year, it's like, that's emailing someone every 10 days or so. Right. And also if they're not responding at all to your emails, maybe stop, because you're probably pissing them off. But if they're just saying, oh yeah, well maybe it's not the exact time, but like send me another note, or like, let's keep in touch, or maybe let's have a call, or yeah, okay, that is interesting. Like if there's still a conversation, I think there's no harm being persistent. If someone shut you down, then yeah, like don't hustle anymore, because you're just going to make them angry and get a restraining order. But sometimes it just takes time. I remember one time I was trying to get a keynote speaking spot for my CEO at Influitive, and I have an email chain with the organizer, like 100 emails long over several months. And we ended up getting my CEO the closing keynote. And like sometimes that's just what it takes to get a publishing spot or to get the right spot. And I think if there's one thing I'm good at, it's tenacity, respectful tenacity, I like to call it. Yeah. Do
you still go through like things like imposter syndrome or like
all the time, man? Yeah, I should have touched on that, but that hits me all the time. Sometimes people are like, oh, like so cool that you're like traveling around the world, running your business. And I'm like, sometimes I wake up and I lose my mind. Like this is hard stuff, right? And also it's not easy to be away from your friends and family. Sometimes, you think you've learned a language and then you walk into a room and you're like, I have no idea what people are saying, right? And you just have to check yourself and just realize, sometimes if you just relax, you can just do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, that imposter syndrome block is hard. And I think it often intersects with burnout. If you're feeling burnout from working too hard or, any number of things, not taking care of your health, it's much easier to feel imposter syndrome. You're just going to feel like, you know what, I can't really do this. Even if you've done it before, sometimes you'll feel like you can't do this. And so you got to maintain yourself. You got to constantly remind yourself. I have big reminders, and sometimes I have a note that I look at. It's like, to look at if sad, and I have a bunch of reasons that I shouldn't be. And further than that, I have a bunch of reasons I should be proud. Small things I've done on my bucket list, things I've checked off. And sometimes you got to just remind yourself that you are trying to do as much as you can. I think another thing, and it's connected to imposter syndrome in the context of like regret or things you've recently done, but I like to give myself the benefit of the doubt, which is that at any given time, I'd like to think that I was making a decision with the best of my information and ability at the time. Sometimes, obviously, like anybody, I'm going to make big mistakes, but generally I'm like, you know what? I could have done better, but at that time I really tried to do the best thing I could, right? Give yourself that benefit, because most people, you do that. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's how you can avoid some of the imposter syndrome in the present and regret in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, like, as you can tell from the sign behind you, the audience can't see it, but I have a giant congrats sign there, and I use it as a way to like stare, because
keep it up.
Yeah, my partner got it for me when I started the podcast a year and a half ago, and it's still there just to remind me when things get a little tough.
That's awesome.
I'm curious on what's your stance on doing like consulting work for free? I understand that you work. I think like 50% of your time is with like a lot of not pro bono, like not for profits as well. I don't know if you do them for free, but there's a lot of like literature on doing stuff for free early on. Like that's what I've been doing in terms of doing my own like coaching work as well. But I'm curious on your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I saw, occasionally I take on pro bono clients, but usually with nonprofits, I still charge them a nominal amount. I do pro bono work from time to time. I like to help a lot of organizations. I think when you're a consultant, it's a bit harder sometimes actually than when you have a full-time job, because you are charging often by the hour or by project. I do care about that a lot. I think where I'd answer your question is more on free work in terms of, paid clients. Like, I don't really do work for free. But what do I not? Here's what I'll tell you is, I charge for the work I do. What I don't really charge for is like non-work. I don't charge for having meetings. I don't really charge for phone calls. I think that's kind of garbage. Is you have a half an hour call with someone and you're like, all right, that's going to be $100. Like, you haven't necessarily provided value there. If it's explicitly like, hey, like you're looking to consult me on my knowledge about this thing within your business, then maybe, we can charge for that. But it's like, let's just talk about a project. Let's ideate. Let's, whiteboard together. Like, don't charge for that kind of stuff. Don't make a potential client or a current client jittery about every time they should feel you want them to talk to you more. You want them to feel like you can just go back and forth, because that's how you're going to get bigger projects, is if they feel like you're invested in the relationship. I think some part of that, I guess you call it free time or free work in a way, but I don't think calls necessarily are. Also, if someone ever asks you, could you take a quick look at this? Like, as long as I'm not doing it every day, like, just do it. Because as long as it doesn't take you more than, several minutes or even half an hour, like, it's worth it, because you might lose technically, whatever, $100, $200 of your time, but you might win $20,000 in a new deal. Right. So yeah, be giving. Sometimes you have to give to get. And sometimes like just give. Like, you never sometimes know when something's going to come back to you. Like, I have had so many random occurrences where, like, because I was nice to somebody at one point or helped them out, it came back to me. For example, like, I'm actually meeting with a client I just signed a deal with yesterday, and a big deal. And I'm meeting with their team tomorrow. And one of the guys in the room, I realized that one time I'd made time to have a coffee with him when he was looking for a job, and now he's working there. So just a great relationship to have at that company, right? Like, someone who already, probably appreciates me and thinks I'm a good guy because I spent time out of my day to do that with him. And I did that without expecting anything in return, right? And now he's probably there as a champion at the account for me, knowing that I'm going to be working with him. It's a good feeling, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you find that a lot of your clients come from such like referrals from the past, or do you find that you have to use that persistence? And
sometimes it's some random dinner I had with a group of people a few years ago. Sometimes it's an old colleague. Sometimes it's an old friend. I had a random head of marketing at a US based technology company, emailed me yesterday and just said, you know what? Somebody referred me to you. I've never heard of this guy. I don't know even who referred me to him. I'm probably going to ask, but if you put good out in the world, people will usually throw it back to you. So I think it's just worth putting out good energy. You don't have to be overly promotional about yourself. I think sometimes you just have to talk about, who you are, what are you doing, what do you care about, and people resonate with that.
So if you were to describe, let's say, the kind of activities you do, if you had to kind of categorize where you spend your time into like buckets, for example, how does that look for you?
Yeah, I mean, typical day at the business, I probably spend 40 to 50% of the day writing. I probably spend 20% of the day either working on new business, like closing deals. I'd include like paperwork, like in that, like invoicing, and proposal writing. And I probably spend 30% of the day, like, this sounds bad, but like either on LinkedIn or on email. I spend a lot of time talking to people. Or I'd also just include phone calls and that, but like I check in on people a lot. I have a lot of catch ups. For me, it's really important. I think it's really important for your brand. I think it's really important to maintain relationships. I mean, I also spend probably an inordinate amount of time on email, given that I'm living abroad right now and most of my family and friends are here. But I really think for me, like, I wouldn't be surprised if I spent 30% of the day on relationship building.
Wow.
Whatever day it is.
Do you have like a system that you use as you think about it? I ask because I find it's as your relationship group just grows and you meet more and more fascinating people, I found it a constant challenge to try to meet as many people and maintain as many like great relationships. Are there like rules that you follow?
Yeah, I mean, so what I try and do, I don't know if you've heard of the number Dunbar's number.
Yeah.
So I'll just explain for the audience. So you can only max in a village and with your 150 relationships, right? So when I was in Nudge.ai, this is what we cared about, right? Was the amount of relationships you can have, and your net worth is almost your amount of relationships, strong relationships. So my goal when I was in Nudge was to double my Dunbar number, because that prediction was made without real technology, right? So I was thinking, well, with technology, could I maintain 300 strong relationships with different people? And I reached that number, which was cool. I have pulled it down a bit because I've realized actually that maybe Dunbar was actually right, or at least kind of right. I brought it down to more like 200. And by strong relationships, I mean, are you in touch with your main set of contacts like at least once every 2 to 3 months? Could be a quick email, it could be a phone call. And then what I do is I bring it down to like almost my top 50 people and then my top 15 people. And it's like my top 15 people, I want to talk to them almost every day. My top 50 people, I probably want to talk to them every 2-3 weeks. And my top 200, I probably want to talk to every 2-3 months. And I often use Nudge to just track, well, who am I losing touch with? How strong are my relationships? I think that's really important. And yeah, just what's in my head, like I have actively tried to not keep in close touch with quite as many people. I have tried to focus my efforts on those, especially those top 15, top 50. You never know. I think it's those people who can often make a real difference. But still, even people on the periphery, like there's simultaneously another theory which is quite interesting. It's the theory of weak ties. Right. You heard of this?
Yeah.
So I mean, I'll explain to the audience. But the idea is, I think it's. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's Granville or something from Stanford researcher who came up with that theory, which was the idea that people effectively on the edge of your network can actually often be more influential to positive outcomes in your life. For example, if you're looking for a job, more people found jobs through people on the edges of their network rather than people who are close to them. Because even though you'd think, oh yeah, my buddy, he's going to help me out, he's going to get me a job. But it's people on the edges of your network who are exposed to other people, other jobs. Like they're not in your same bubble. There's not as much overlap. And so occasionally cultivating the relationships at the edges of your relationship web, so to speak, is still valuable because those people may hear of things you don't, or that your friend circle doesn't.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that's constantly in my purview as I'm trying to like become better at it and work at it. I'm curious, like, what if you had to then, if you think about like you had to start over, you had to start over and like redesign your consulting company again, what kind of major learnings would you implement to maybe change the tactics you used, or would you just, is there nothing you change?
If I was to start over again, I would have, as soon as I got 3 clients, I would have kept going. Even though I thought at the time, I was like, okay, I want to get, my first goal was to get 3 clients and to just do really well with them for a long period of time. But I think I should have just kept growing the business. Yeah. The reason I think that is because I think that through the path of growth itself and not just serving the clients, but that's been really informative to me to help understand what the client's brain is thinking. It's also been really helpful to hire other people to work on these projects with me. I've made my kind of first 3 contracting hires, and it's been a big plan. I think if I had ramped up sooner, I think I would have been able to do it while still learning. And like I believe in strongly, like before you hire somebody to do something, you should know how to do it really well. In terms of your team, if that's the focus of your company. So I wish I knew a bit more. I wish I knew a bit more and had brought those people in earlier, because I think it would have just accelerated my pace, and I would still be where I'm at now, or maybe even a better spot. Yeah.
And what excites you now as you're going forward with your own company? Like, what's the next thing that really excites you?
Yeah, for me, I think I have to make a decision. It's like, is this just a business that I'm doing to do for a few years and enjoy, or is it going to become something I run my whole life? Is it a lifestyle business where, I run some projects, I have some writers on the side, maybe I even take on another full-time job at some point? Do I keep traveling, for example, to Nairobi next, or do I go back and join another company at some point? My gut tells me that this is worth investing in, and I really do like running a company. So I'm gonna play that out as long as I can. Mm-hmm. I think it's just different forms of dealing with it sometimes.
And what motivates you to deal with all the difficult things too?
The number one thing for me has been flexibility to do what I want. It's been to break out of 9 to 5. I really think that the 9 to 5 workday is, and this is no hot take by any means or even controversial, I think, given current dialogue, but it's like, especially in knowledge industries, I don't think 9 to 5 works. I think that, it's already been proven you only really have max 6-month productive hours a day. I also think that working 5 days a week in general, I'm flexible with this, but I think it's overrated. I think that if I invested, I do this as much as I can, but every time I just take a 4-day work week, I just feel so much better. I feel more productive. I feel healthier. I feel like my sleep's on a better pattern. Hump day is real. You just feel like the week's still only half over. I think we need to make things easier for ourselves, and we'll actually get more work done. And I think it's in companies' best interest to invest in the health and the well-being of their employees. I think they'll find much better results in productivity.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. Yeah, it's been a constant weird struggle as you when you're running your own thing, where you always, I at least always felt like you're never doing enough. But then when I look back on the hours I'm actually committing, it's I really only have energy for 20-25 hours, and then after that it's just all trying to eke a little something out, just squeezing it out, and it just really never really ends that well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said the short work week isn't a hot take, but then I'm curious, what do you think is a hot take? What's something that you believe in that you think just goes against conventional wisdom totally?
I'm still trying to figure out if I ultimately believe this, but some things I'm contemplating in, for knowledge workers, basically get rid of offices. Another thing I think about is honestly 3-day work weeks. And I think that's definitely tougher to imagine. I think the other thing that I'm ultimately trying to figure out is across time zones, because that's kind of an experience I'm having these days, and more so soon, is how do we not get so preoccupied with having everyone in the same room at the same time? I think I'm really interested in asynchronous communication and how maybe it could be more effective. The other thing I really think is destructive to workplaces is Slack. I was all the rage for Slack for a while, and then I just realized my life is so much better without it. I've been invited to so many Slack groups. Slack to me feels like a distraction from work. I think if something's so important that you need to consult someone else about it, like you must be able to send an email and people can read it on their own time. Slack seems to convey immediacy. But what's interesting is like people seem to like, I think I just read some research yesterday, but like when you get interrupted doing a task, you may as well like lose almost half an hour on working on that task in terms of your effectiveness. So the other thing I wonder about too is the open office thing. Like, I wonder if we should go back to cubicles or like offices. Like, open office, I find people just talk to each other all the time. So it's something I think about.
Oh yeah, like it's very refreshing to hear that, because I always feel like the crazy person that just tells my friends that maybe you should be considered Slack. Have you tried going on airplane mode to be maybe more productive? And,
totally.
Even at my own WeWork, I try to find the space that just stares randomly out a window instead of actually looking at people, so I can feel like I'm not in an open office environment. But yeah, those are definitely things like I love talking about and writing out and believe in.
Best investment for me personally this year. I've always don't love to buy a lot of expensive things, but I finally did invest in some like good Bose headphones. It's game changer.
100%.
Game changer. I can't believe the difference.
Unfortunately, as we have to kind of wrap up on the time, because you're such a busy guy with so much going on.
Oh man.
Some final kind of questions I'd be curious to ask is, if you were to imagine the 20-year-old Jaxson, probably still at University of Western Ontario, and if that 20-year-old were to look at what you're doing right now, what do you think the emotional reaction from that 20-year-old would be?
Absolute disappointment. No, I think, I'd like to think I'd be proud of myself because I had always wanted to run my own company. I remember when I was 20 years old, I had a different path in mind. I actually wrote out this future resume, which I still have for posterity's sake. And I laugh at it, but it was like, I'm going to go work at, McKinsey and Company. And then I'm going to go work at the United Nations. And I'm going to go work for the government of Canada. I had all these big institutions in mind. And I had like this degree I wanted to do at like Harvard or Oxford, like all these different names. And I think the more that I've gone into that, and analyze a lot of those companies, like I don't think a lot of these companies, amazing universities, necessarily have better people than anywhere else, smart people or whatever. I think what they've created is great processes, but I think that there's no reason why a lot of small organizations can't compete and maybe actually have a better potential for innovation and have a better potential for disruption. I think where I sometimes struggle is I've chosen a less institutional path, away from a lot of these larger organizations and away from the message, the control of the message. And I sometimes wonder if I'd be more effective in one of the big ones, but I doubt it a lot. I feel like a lot of the big firms, if you go and work for them your first few years, not really doing much. And even if you do get in a position of some authority after 10 years or even more, I don't know if it's always lasting. I feel like it takes so much effort to shift those large organizations. Whereas I still see a lot of value coming from smaller ones. I think the growth curve is higher, and I think the learning curve is higher, relatively. And I really respect, ultimately the path I've taken. It's been hard sometimes. It's been uncertain. It's been nonlinear. It's been ambiguous. It's been now multi-continental. It's been tough and trepidatious, but I would recommend anybody that's considering to take a chance to do so.
And so what kind of advice do you wish you could have given to that 20-year-old self, if you could?
Well, 20-year-old self, still at university, probably drink less at Western. That's probably one of them. Second, though, I would say is don't be in a rush to do everything. Like in 20s, you have more time than you think. It sometimes feels like things are going really fast, but you have a lot of time. I sometimes wish I spent a bit more time just being calm. because I have had moments of a lot of pain, a lot of stress. And I think I would invest in your emotional foundation first. Other foundations, like the foundation of your mentality, your skills, your financial foundations, these things can all come a bit later, but make sure your emotions are good. Be resilient, focus on, building that resilience. You can feel the pain, but you build up your capacity to come back from it. Feel really deeply. I think everyone should invest in meditation. And I'd say investing in my body. I didn't really do a lot of exercise until the last few years. University, I remember going to the gym for a few months and that was it. I just kind of let it go. And now I spend a lot of time hiking and biking and, walking and swimming and my health feels great. It just makes everything better. You sleep better. You look better. You feel better. You just take care of yourself because you got a long way to go. Your 20s aren't a sprint. You're going to change way more times than you think you are. It seems like everybody I know who's now kind of, I guess in their mid to late 20s and sort of in my age group right now, like people just started to realize like, oh yeah, like I don't have to like bust, my butt all the time just to kind of get where I want. If I just work hard steadily, I can probably still get what I want. And I also don't have to do things the way that they were necessarily prescribed to me or told to me. I can make changes. I can change sectors. I can change jobs. I can change disciplines. I can move. I can, break up with that toxic person or that toxic friend or that family member. Like you have control of your life. And I feel like for me, like taking control of my life is the biggest thing that I've done to feel better and not to do a lot more. And I think, any young person who's worried about that or about their future, like just think about how can you remove sources of negativity now and focus on the positivity you have now so that you can go the distance, go the journey.
Awesome. No, that's a good advice to give to yourself and to, I think, a lot of the young people who listen to the podcast. Jaxson, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you wish we kind of covered? I know you have
the entire history of humanity. Future of artificial intelligence. We talked forever. The only things I'll just recommend a couple resources to look at. One is if you are interested at all in learning more about AI or you're interested in a career in AI and machine learning. Daniel didn't mention this, but there's an ebook that I worked on. It's totally free. It's called The Ultimate Machine Learning Interview Guide. 25,000 words, tons of good examples. If you have any interest in getting a career there. Springboard also offers courses in this. I have no direct paid affiliation with them. I just genuinely think it's a very cool resource. So check that out if you're interested in AI. The other thing I'd recommend is if you're interested in freelancing, check out Wave. Wave is a Toronto-based company. They have a lot of good resources in freelancing on how to like start your business. They also have free accounting software. They are a client of mine, so I do have to disclose that. But I honestly think it's great. It's great. It's great. It's free. There's a lot of good stuff. And if you're ever interested in writing a blog, the last resource I would recommend is a guy named Ryan Robinson. His website is ryrob.com. Really good advice on starting a blog. Lots of free resources. Lots of good templates to get started. It's easy. It's fast. Go take control of your life. Start what you need to, and make those changes. Don't be afraid because you've got a lot of opportunity and a lot of things to fall back on. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks for the note, Jaxson, and thanks for coming to the podcast to share your story with myself and my audience. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, brother. Okay, talk soon.
Bye. All right, thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope the story was inspiring to you. Hopefully it also helped you expand your perspectives. Hopefully it also made you question the default path that you might have been going on or the default beliefs you might have had. And maybe now it'll make you even think about doing something about it, doing something different maybe, challenging yourself, being courageous. Who knows? But regardless, I'm really happy that you took some time out of your day to listen to this fantastic story with my guest. And if you would like to somehow, in some way, contribute and help support the podcast and maybe even just be part of the community that I'm trying to build with the greater OMD Ventures platform, really think about being a stakeholder in the platform. And the quick way to do that is to go to my website, oldmandan.com, and go to the stakeholders page. I believe it's oldmandan.com/stakeholder. And the link is also down below. And that's how you can figure out how you can subscribe, follow to get more updates on the free content, but at the same time also donate, and donate by actually just buying me a coffee. That's just how I put it. And you can buy me a coffee a month, coffee a week, or coffee every day of the year. And think about it as the way that, if you wanted to chat with me, you might just bring me out for coffee and buy me a coffee. Or if you wanted to bring one of my guests out to chat, you might buy them a coffee. So just think of it as I'm the service that's doing that for you. So you can just pay me in coffees. Don't worry, everything will still be free. It would just really help if you would like to show your support this way, so that I can use the coffee money to buy myself actual coffees, and also to buy my guests actual coffees, and use the leftover money to actually grow the platform, as well as even keep it operationally alive as well, because all this isn't really free, and it does take a lot of time to build it as well as operate it and hopefully grow it further. So your support would be amazing if you would like to contribute. And so yeah, just check out the website, go to the stakeholders page, and read the different kind of benefits you might even get as a stakeholder. All right, thank you.